Imagine this. You're watching the bridge of the Enterprise. The camera cuts to engineering. There's Scotty, yelling that the warp engines can't take much more punishment. He looks like every overworked mechanic you've ever met. Grease on his hands, worry in his voice, a hint of humor even when everything is going wrong. Now freeze the frame. Zoom in on that hand he's moving so fast. Because the man behind Scotty? He knew exactly what it felt like when things really couldn't take much more. Before he ever stepped onto a starship set, James Doohan had already stormed a real beach under real gunfire. He'd already been shot 6 times. He'd already died once on paper, and a piece of metal over his heart had already made the decision that he was going to live. This is Grand Adventures, and tonight, we're traveling through 2 worlds at once, the beaches of Normandy and the bridge of the Enterprise, to meet the war hero behind Star Trek's greatest engineer. You don't start a journey like this in space. You start it in 1939 in Canada. That year, as the world tilted toward war, a young man named James Doohan enlisted in the Canadian Army. He would become a lieutenant in the Royal Canadian Artillery, a job that meant math, precision, and the ability to stay calm while things exploded around you. Artillery doesn't work if you panic. You've got to calculate, correct, adjust. You have to understand that every small change at your end means something massive and possibly deadly at the other. It's not that different from engineering. You just don't usually wear a kilt. Fast forward to June 6, 1944. D-Day. Canadian forces hit Juno Beach in the early waves of the Allied invasion of Normandy. The water is cold. The sand is mined. There are machine gun nests ahead and chaos everywhere. James Doohan rides in with the second wave. When you see the old black and white footage of those landings, the ramps dropping, the soldiers pushing through surf and smoke, it's easy to think of them as anonymous shapes. But somewhere in that storm is the man who will one day stand on a soundstage and shout about the engines. On Juno Beach, Doohan survives the landing and pushes inland with his unit. They dodge mines and sniper fire and finally dig in, setting up defensive positions as night comes down over a France that is suddenly full of Allied uniforms. By late evening, he's moving between command posts, checking on his men. It's around 11:30 p.m. The fighting has died down, but the tension hasn't. And that's when everything goes wrong. A nervous Canadian sentry, armed with a Bren gun, spots a figure moving in the dark and makes a split-second decision. He opens fire. In the space of a heartbeat, James Doohan is hit 6 times. 4 bullets slam into his leg. 1 punches through his right hand, destroying his middle finger. And 1 round hits him square in the chest. That last bullet should have ended the story. It didn't. Because over his heart, in his breast pocket, Doohan was carrying a silver cigarette case, a gift from his brother. The bullet struck the metal, flattened, and stopped. A few millimeters of silver turned into a personal deflector shield. In another timeline, there is no Scotty, no Star Trek, no Klingon language. The Enterprise we know never quite assembles because one of its most important pieces never makes it out of Normandy. But in this timeline, the case holds. The medics work, the blood stops, Doohan survives. The price is steep. His right middle finger is so badly damaged it has to be amputated. The leg wounds heal, but they never completely go away. The scars follow him home. Later, he trains as an air observation pilot, flying low-altitude missions in small, fast aircraft to help direct artillery fire. It's the kind of work where your margin for error is razor thin. There's a story that he once flew his plane in a slalom between telegraph poles just to prove it could be done, and got a reprimand for it. By the time the war ends, James Doohan has already lived through something bigger and more terrifying than most movie plots. But when peace arrives, he does something a lot of veterans quietly did. He changes his life. He doesn't stay with guns and planes. He goes looking for a new kind of signal. After the war, Doohan heads into an entirely different world. Radio. He enrolls at the Lorne Greene Academy of Radio Arts in Toronto. Yes, the same Lorne Greene who would later star on Bonanza. There, Doohan doesn't just learn how to speak into a microphone. He learns how to control sound. He spends the late 1940s and early 1950s working almost non-stop. Radio dramas, live broadcasts, early television. He later estimated he'd appeared in over 4,000 radio programs and hundreds of TV shows. Along the way, he discovers something about himself. He's really good with voices, accents, dialects, character work. In one studio, he's Irish. In another, Scottish. In another, German or American or something else entirely. He switches mid-sentence. He can slip between characters like he's changing jackets. When you think of a voice actor today, you might picture someone in a sound booth recording for animation or games. In Doohan's day, this meant you could stay employed. If you could be a dozen different people on the same network, the work kept coming. But it also did something else. It trained him to think about language like a machine. How does a word feel in the mouth? What happens if you shift the rhythm just a little? How much can you change the sound before it stops feeling real? Those years in the booth are his second battlefield. Only this time, the weapons are vowels and consonants. One day, those skills are going to help him do something very strange. Build the sound of an alien language that doesn't exist yet. Then comes a call for a new science fiction series in the United States. The year is the mid-1960s. Television is full of westerns and cop shows. Space stories are still a gamble. Doohan auditions for a part, the chief engineer of a starship. When he meets the producers of Star Trek, they ask him to read the lines with different accents. He tries a few, English, German, maybe Italian. Then they ask him a simple question. Which one do you think this character should have? Doohan doesn't have to think long. In his experience, he says, the best engineers he ever met were Scotsmen. He'd served with Scottish troops during the war. He liked their toughness, their humor, their refusal to sugarcoat bad news. So he reaches back into that memory, pulls out a Scots accent, and wraps it around the lines. And suddenly the character clicks. The name comes next. Doohan offers a mix that's part borrowed, part personal. Montgomery, from his own middle name. Scott, from his grandfather. Montgomery Scott. Scotty. On paper, he's just the guy in charge of the engine room. On screen, he becomes something else. The voice of every overworked expert you desperately need in a crisis. The engines can't take much more, Captain. I can't change the laws of physics. Behind all of that is a man who's stood in real smoking ruin and told himself the same thing. We're past the limits now, but I'm going to try anyway. There's one problem, though. A quiet one. That missing middle finger. Television in the 1960s wasn't high definition, but it was still close enough for viewers to notice if they were looking. Doohan and the directors treated his right hand like a technical challenge. They framed shots so his left hand was prominent. They put tools in his grip. Sometimes he wore a glove. Sometimes a hand double filled in. Most of the time you never see it. But if you go back and rewatch certain episodes, the Corbomite maneuver is a famous example, and you pause at just the right moment, you'll catch it. The chief engineer of the Enterprise, reaching for the controls with a hand that's missing a finger. A relic of Juno Beach, quietly riding along into the 23rd century. It's a tiny thing. It doesn't change the plot, but it changes the way the story feels. Because now you're not just looking at a fictional officer. You're watching a man who has already paid a real-world price for standing in harm's way and decided to keep going. If the story ended there, it would already be remarkable. War hero, working actor, beloved character. But James Doohan had one more surprise. When Star Trek: The Motion Picture came along, the producers realized they had a problem. Aliens were about to show up on the big screen, and they couldn't just keep speaking English if they wanted the universe to feel bigger. The Klingons in particular needed something else. They needed a sound. Doohan stepped in. Working behind the scenes with producer John Povil, he sketched out the first rough sounds and words for what would become Klingon. Harsh consonants, a jagged rhythm, something that felt like it came from a warrior culture, not a boardroom. It wasn't a full language yet. It was more like a handful of steel beams and a basic floor plan. Later, linguist Mark Okrand would take that framework and build the complete Klingon language. Grammar, vocabulary, rules. Fans would eventually learn it, speak it, even translate Shakespeare into it. But the first taste of it, the basic flavor, came from the same man who was already racing around the engine room and shouting up at the captain. Doohan also tinkered with the sound of Vulcan, helping shape early dialogue so that Spock's people would sound calm, precise, and just a bit alien. Less emotion, more control. Clean edges instead of rough ones. To most viewers, it was just alien talk. To Doohan, it was engineering. Pick the right phonemes. Strip away the clutter. Make it sound like it belongs to a culture that really exists, somewhere just off-screen. The man who'd once calculated artillery fire and flown low over battlefields was now calibrating syllables instead of shell trajectories. Different tools, same mindset. If you go hunting through his career, you'll find James Doohan popping up in all kinds of places. In 1963, he appears in a Twilight Zone episode called Valley of the Shadow, set in a hidden town with access to a mysterious device that can disassemble and reassemble matter, making things disappear and reappear with the flick of a switch. It's not called a transporter. There's no Starfleet logo anywhere. But the idea is startlingly familiar. Technology that can break the world down into tiny pieces, store it, and put it back together again. While the humans using it argue over whether we're responsible enough to have that kind of power. The future engineer of the Enterprise, testing out godlike tech in black and white. Later, when the Star Trek movies start using real national parks as stand-ins for alien landscapes, Yosemite cliffs for dramatic climbs, other parks for strange new worlds, Doohan is right there in the cast. He's the engineer in a universe that keeps borrowing Earth's most dramatic geology to play the role of distant planets. War, radio, television, science fiction. His life just keeps looping around the same idea. Systems under stress, people trying to hold them together. James Doohan died in 2005, at the age of 85. By then, he'd lived several lifetimes worth of stories. He'd been a soldier, a pilot, a radio workhorse, a character actor, a convention favorite, a quietly influential language shaper. He'd taken a night on a beach in Normandy and turned its scars into something else, a kind of authenticity that leaked through every time he looked at a captain and told him, honestly, that the ship was at its limit. For millions of people around the world, he will always be Scotty, the man you call when everything is breaking and you're not sure you're going to make it this time. But behind that character is a real human being who had already faced that moment in a landing craft, under tracers and flares and friendly fire. Maybe that's why he feels so solid on screen. Not because he was pretending to keep a fragile system from failing, but because he knew exactly how thin the line is between everything working and everything coming apart. This has been Grand Adventures. Thanks for traveling with us.